Welcome everyone. We'll just give it a minute before we kick off.
It's that digital version of where the speakers all sort of chat at the front like they're having a really meaningful conversation.
Any jokes?
Any jokes? No. I can tell you the story of my bad hotel art if you like.
That would be
I
good.
bought that in IKEA when I was, I think, 19. It's quite a
Is
while
it a
ago now.
sentimental piece of art?
Surprisingly enough, no, it isn't particularly sentimental. No. Yeah, it was an on the way to the checkouts when IKEA was closing purchase when I was first moving out of home, and it's sort of just ended up in the least important room in the house ever since, which currently is my crappy little study. So the zebra, everybody. Yeah.
Probably worth something now.
I'm sure, yes. At least £5.
Right, should we get kick-started? I know we're 2 minutes past 10, so welcome everyone. My name is Holly, I'm the MD of BIMA. This is a BIMA and Microsoft webinar. Today we've brought some expert panelists, all really good friends of BIMA, to discuss the future of work. So a very hot topic, but also a very big one. So I hope our panelists are going to be able to provoke and provide some practical next steps for, I know what everyone's kind of trying to plan for what the next 2, 3, 4 months bring. So to host today, we have Rob Belgrave. Rob is CEO of Wirehive, but he is also, much more importantly, co-chair of BIMA's blockchain think tank and all-round BIMA supporter. So hi, Rob.
Hey, Holly. Right. I'll take it from there, I think. So again, the joys of like digital events, you're like, is she throwing it to me? I think she is.
I am throwing it to you.
Cool. Good morning, everybody. The other slightly weird thing about doing digital events is I have no idea how many of you are here. So I'm sure it's loads of people, and I hope you're all well and smiling and enjoying whatever particular context you find us in today. So the future of work, massive topic, something lots of people have been speaking about, and you'll be reassured to hear that we're not just going to tell you that remote working is here to stay. Like, we're going to go a little bit deeper than that today. I think there's been plenty of that going on over the last few weeks, and I'm sure you all need yet another guide on how to run a remote meeting and how Zoom and Teams work and all that stuff. Like, we're going to go a bit deeper than that today, hopefully. We've got two amazing guests, panelists with us, Hasan and Nat, who I'll introduce in a moment, and I'll sort of offer my perspective as well. And I think that we all kind of come at this from a slightly different place. So I think we'll start with just a quick intro each, just to kind of give you a bit of insight into who we are and where, what our kind of connection to this topic is. I'll kick off. So as Holly said, I'm Rob. I'm the CEO of a business called Wirehive. We're a technology company, predominantly working in and around kind of cloud services, so hosting infrastructure and all the kind of stuff that goes with that. We're very fortunate, I guess, in that our business is pretty well insulated from what's been going on. People need what we do, whether it's raining or the sun's out. And so, we've been able to continue to grow and perform reasonably well commercially, with a few, sort of a bit of like freak out at the beginning. And actually now it's kind of business as usual. I think to give you an idea of scale, we're about 40 people. And my biggest challenges have been around leading a team through this uncertain time and keeping everybody motivated and what morale looks like in this context and things like that. So looking forward to getting into the topic in a bit more detail. Let's go to Hasan. Please say hello.
Thanks, Rob. So hi, everyone. I'm Hasan. I work at Microsoft. And to give you kind of some context of what that looks like, I sit in the modern work team, which is responsible for Teams. And my kind of day-to-day is looking after our first-time worker product. And essentially what that means is, how do we help the people who are most affected today? So the people like our nurses, our doctors, people who work in shops and retailers, how do we give them the right tools to make their lives easier? So this whole situation is quite interesting because on the one hand, you've got the food retailers and the people who are making the country run every day. And on the other side, you've got the other side of retail, which is almost kind of not working at all. So it's a very interesting time for that industry. So I'm looking forward to the conversation we have today.
Fantastic. And is it right that you guys rolled out a massive Teams deployment for the NHS during this period? There was some huge deployment, right?
We did. It was one of our biggest deployments, and some of the partners that we work with were absolutely incredible. In the speed that we did it, I think it was something like over 1 million people in the NHS we deployed within a few weeks, which is an incredible thing to do in such a short space of time. So it makes me really proud to say that I was part of that in some sense.
Absolutely. Great. Well, maybe we'll get into that in a bit more detail later on. Good morning, Hasan. Thank you for joining us. And Nat, all yours.
Good morning. Great to be here today. So I'm Nat. In one part of my life, I am co-president of BIMA. In my day job, I am the VP for Brand and Marketing EMEA for a company called EPAM. So my background is agency. I was CEO of Amaze and recently managing partner of Think. So I've come from small agencies and I'm now working for EPAM, who acquired Think about 18 months ago. EPAM are just shy of 40,000 people. We're a large product engineering company and consultancy, originated in Belarus. It's a very large Eastern European contingent, listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which is where we listed in around 2012. So my role is to basically help the business get its brand better known. It's probably one of the lesser known of the larger SIs, and also to help embed the integrated consulting offering that we have following a number of acquisitions over the last few years, including Think, as I've said. So since January, well, since March, my role has focused really on standing up our remote by design proposition. So EPAM has spent 18 months really looking at well, we've always had a distributed workforce because we've got over 100 delivery centers. But over the last 18 months, we've been working on our EPAM Anywhere brand, which is actually all about working remotely. So we've had a good head start in terms of standing up our systems and processes to be able to deal with where we are in terms of the pandemic. And also because we're global, we obviously also saw this at the turn of the year as it hit our Asian offices. So have sort of had, as it's emerged, as the crisis has emerged in Europe, had some key learnings and takeouts from our colleagues in Asia as this pandemic has moved around the world.
Did you guys find that you were able to, I guess, were you given a shortcut? Were you afforded a shortcut by your teams in the territories that were impacted earlier than we were? Did you kind of get a feeling for what was coming, perhaps in a way others didn't? Do you think because you had a footprint in those territories?
I think that certainly there was, you know, the sort of the leadership and management of it was mobilized very quickly. And our team contingent over there is smaller, so it was sort of easier to manage, but there was definitely, I guess, a step ahead in terms of preparedness because it had been talked about for 2 months every day and dealt with every month for 2 days before it even hit mainland Europe and UK. So definitely a head start. And I think when it did hit, because of our preparedness, I mean, we were 98% working remotely within 3 days. Of a development team of 37,000. So,
wow.
Yeah, you know, I guess, again, the distributed workforce helps, and the fact that we've been, as we say, practicing for 18 months with our sort of work anywhere technologies and processes has helped for sure.
Is it reasonable then to infer that from a productivity point of view, you were not too badly impacted, given you were kind of ready to work in that way already?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, you know, we are at least on a par with what we would be doing if we were all still based in our delivery centres, at least on a par.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, look,
of course, but productivity, we're doing good.
Great. I mean, I guess I'm teasing that out because I think it's, in terms of what the future of work looks like, I think it's about that idea of being able to be productive wherever you are. And so I think it's really interesting to talk to somebody with that sort of scale, you know, 40,000 employees globally, and and to hear that it's worked. You know, like you had it in place, it did the job. Your team were at least as productive. I think we can read between the lines there. You know, it's really, really interesting. So that's fantastic to hear. Right, let's dive into some of our sort of questions that we talked about before the call. And for everyone listening today and watching, we've got a Q&A running throughout the session in the Zoom client. So if you're not familiar with it, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or somewhere on your phone if you're on your phone. If you submit any questions throughout the session, I'll do my best to keep an eye on them and either ask them during the talks today or perhaps for a few minutes at the end. And if you don't have any questions, then we can always make some up, but I'm sure we're not going to struggle for time. And we'll finish at 11 sharp today if you've got further calls and stuff after this to get to. So I think I'd like to start with the second question in true moderator fashion, where you get to decide which order we do things in. I like the what are your key learnings question that we posited. So I think that I'll come to Hasan first. I think the question is what have the key learnings been during this time? And I think from my perspective, a lot of it's been about the strength of culture and how powerful that is during this time. Like I was having this debate with one of our non-exec team yesterday, and he works for a number of businesses of all shapes and sizes, some of which are in America and predominantly in the UK. And I was sort of talking to him about this idea that remote work is here to stay, and that I think a lot of businesses in the future will be more accommodating of that. And then for those of you that caught the amazing talk last week with Nell Watson and Pete Traynor at BIMA event, she talked about this idea that the contract between employer and employee has kind of changed fundamentally, and that there was this kind of mill owner feeling, but that people were productive if they were in my building. So or the building rather. So people would kind of have these cultures that were set up around everybody being in the office, and just by being there was this sort of sort of implication that they were being productive by just being present, right? It was a presenteeism culture. And I think that if you look at modern businesses and more progressive businesses with better cultures, it tends to be more about output and results than about input and presence. And actually, the office is somewhere people want to be because it's an amazing place to be with their colleagues, and it's a fun place to be, and not somewhere they're sort of mandated to be. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out. And I suppose what I'm saying in summary is, I think it's not about whether you just let people work remotely or not. I think it's about having players who can work in that way and can be productive without needing oversight all the time, and having a culture that can support it, right? Having a culture that still works when people aren't necessarily all in the same building. So I guess I'm waffling a bit. Let's come to you, Hasan. What have been some of your key learnings from this time?
I mean, you're absolutely right. Culture has been, if you look across the board for the customers that we work with, it's been the number one thing that they've said has helped them pivot really quickly from kind of being in an office, being around people every day, and showing face almost, to actually saying, what is taking a step back. And the leadership teams that we speak to have said, we've really taken a step back and thought about what does it mean for our business? What are we here to do? What is our ethos? How do we help our employees do the best work without them needing to be in the office? There's a whole bunch of things that need to happen for that. Things like basic things like technology. Do they all have a device to work from, all the way down to, do they have space at home to have a work office, or what is the environment like where they're working at home? So different customers are in different parts of that journey, but the companies that we speak to that have been successful in pivoting as part of the culture, trust has been the main thing in that. So actually trusting the people, as you said, to work on outputs. If you have projects, people who work in the project teams, for example, it's a very, very fluid environment. You've got to do a lot of things quickly. You constantly be in communication. How do you take that environment, put it online, and then trust the people and empower them with the right tools and technology to actually go and deliver the projects they're going to deliver? On the other side of that as well, it's the almost some of the negative aspects of culture have also come out, where companies that haven't set up or have never thought about it, or are in industries that have never needed to think about it, are actually now, it's such a big shock to them that they've had to really reset and say, okay, well, for a long time, we've been thinking about, let's take retail, for example, we've had to be in a store we need our people to be in a store at one place. They've got a very specific job to do. Now they're like, okay, well, stores are still working. We can reskill. We can train people up. So how do we then think about, okay, there's in the kind of old world, we have this role, but now people can be trained to do other stuff. So I was talking to a customer the other day in the hospitality business, and they actually, when this all started, they retrained all of their waiters to become delivery drivers within a kind of couple of weeks. And that was amazing, because they said, well, we saw this coming, we knew the impact of it on our business, but our culture was flexible and kind of based on the aspect of growth mindset, that we could do that quite quickly. So that's been amazing in terms of learning, just how companies have adapted, have fundamentally put on two things from what you've seen. One is their culture, and two, their ability to adapt to that culture and change it to the new world.
Fantastic. And Nat, on this idea of culture or a different key learning that you found integral, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think to that point, one of the key things that we hear time and time again is kind of like the importance of structure and making sure that there is good purpose for every single person in your organization, and that the vulnerability in people sort of can come out quite quickly, actually, and therefore actually being able to create an environment where people feel like they're going to work every day mentally and to have good purpose has been a really important thing. And I think that some of the activities that people have introduced, and some of the fun things for sure, in terms of keeping community, building community remotely, has been really key. But also the transparency that has been running has been really important as well. So I think the importance of leadership, regardless of size of organization, to be able to stand up every day and talk to your business, to share what's actually happening, and not be afraid to share bad news as well as actually good news and where things are going, has been really, really key. And I think we talk a lot about tools, but actually the tools are there to facilitate us as leaders finding new ways to operate our companies. And I think that that's been really, really interesting. And the willingness to learn in a very transparent way how to actually use the tooling that we have at our disposal to structure our businesses and lead in different ways and share in different ways and deliver in different ways has been really, really key. And I think also part of that, one thing that I've seen that's worked really well, and I think that BIMA has really been strong in it, and maybe you'll want to bring Holly in, is actually the speed of action in these times has actually been some of the decisive ways in which businesses are succeeding or failing. So being prepared to trust maybe your gut, read what's going on in different parts of the world, and actually act, and know that something's changing and trust yourself is also key. Because I think BIMA sort of transitioning online has been a big part of why the community are so engaged with BIMA and have been all throughout. And again, bring Holly in on that. And then I guess my last point really on learnings has been working remotely doesn't mean just turning on a camera and everything is always the same in terms of every meeting or every event you do. The content and the presentation and the theatre that you create, I think, is really important. And I think there's so many calls you go on. I've just jumped off one to come on here where it's like, can you see my screen? Is the presentation there yet? Is this happening? Oh, I can't, like there's a preparedness to working remotely that I think you can see people who do it brilliantly and you remember those meetings or you remember those events. And so I think that's another key learning that certainly I've observed as well as taken part in over the last few weeks.
Well, let me take this opportunity to compliment you on your rather fetching set you have there, Nat. In this case, I mean, the bookcase looks the part. Sofa framed just so. I'll definitely remember that.
Holly will tell you 90% of the time I sit up in the loft where it doesn't look like this, and also it's so far away from my roots that nobody can hear or see me. So you are welcome.
being treated to the live event set today. Holly, thank you for popping back on. Yeah, it'd be great. I mean, I totally agree with Nat's comments on the work BIMA's done. I think it's been under your leadership, with the support of the exec, it's been amazing to see the transition BIMA's been able to make, and just the momentum and just sheer volume of stuff that's been coming out. What's your experience been in terms of some key learnings from this time running an organization like BIMA?
Well, we were kind of lucky in a way that we had a week before lockdown. So we started working from home a week before. So we were kind of, we're not international by any means, UK wide, yes. So we didn't have that kind of heads up, but we had that week to look around and be speaking a lot to our members, and we just listened. And that, I would say, is a key learning, just to speak to, all your key stakeholders, everyone you're involved with, and just listen to them. And I think then we realized that there was an opportunity there. And yeah, in the last, I think the first week of lockdown, we did 3 or 4 events, having pretty much been 99% physical events prior to that. So we really were not experienced in any of this. And then for the last 8 weeks, we've probably done the same, if not an event a day. So I mean, huge kudos to the team, just giving it a go. Not, we try and have fun with it. And we try, as Nat said, we try and make these things kind of interesting, but also not worry if they're not quite right. I think that's really important. So a team that's not afraid to kind of, make mistakes, mess things up, has been really, really brilliant. Not to say they pretty much do an amazing job, obviously.
Of course.
Also, just having a community there ready to go. Like the BIMA community is amazing, and we've had to turn around stuff so quickly, and I think that just reflects how people are managing the day to day. They're not thinking about 2 weeks time, they're thinking about in a day or 2 days time. We rarely actually kind of shout about events till a couple of days before, because we know people are just not thinking that far ahead. Mm-hmm. So to be able to pull on the community, to turn things around really quickly, for them to just have this giving back mentality, and also trust in us that it's going to be okay. We're not going to throw you, under the train. You'll have a good time, and you won't have to prep too much, and it'll be an interesting experience. Has been, really, I think, a real learning, certainly. And then just, allowing people to break out of their day-to-day bubble, I think, is really important. So mm-hmm. A lot of what we do, some of it is structured, like today's session, but a lot of what we do is just bringing people together and sharing challenges, and hopefully solving challenges as well. And I think allowing people just to share their work experiences at the moment has been really important, because a lot of people are really, really busy, especially if they're having to look after kids, etc. as well. It's insane. And just for them to be able to take 30 minutes out of their day to speak to other MDs or, whatever, to find out if everyone else is having the same experiences, has been, I think, really, really valuable.
Great.
So, yeah.
Well, I mean, look, again, not to make it a BIMA loving, but I think what you guys have been doing is fantastic. And here we are, right, on one of those brilliant events. So let's take a question, because it's pertinent to the discussion we're having. So this is from Alex Guest. I'm going to guess that Guest is not his surname, but my apologies if it is. So question from Alex, which was, are clear KPIs or OKRs et al. Essential for remote work to properly thrive? And I think they are, and we'll get everyone's opinion, but I think that's exactly what I was alluding to. He says, haha, it is indeed my surname. Awesome. Hey, Alex Guest. I think clear KPIs or OKRs. OKRs, if you're not familiar with them, is kind of a thing that Google made famous. It's a way of setting key objectives, basically. I think that having these things really well defined is important all the time, but becomes even more important in the context of remote working. And I think the reason for that is because when somebody is on their own, right? Okay, video is available and stuff, but basically you're stuck in a room on your own most of the time. Like some of our team live alone, so they're basically in solitary confinement, right? And so you can go, day after day without any true human contact, and without the kind of reverberation of a team around you. It's quite hard sometimes to know whether the work you're doing is actually contributing to the journey the business is on. So I think making sure that everybody knows how to measure whether they've had a good day or not when they're not really sure is really, really important. And we've always believed this is like fundamental, even in a normal work context, but in the remote context, I think it just like puts 100 times more pressure on it. And this speaks to what Nat was saying about, great leadership through these times has been really transparent. Again, like we're quite fortunate in that we were always very transparent. So for us, it was just like doing what we already did for the reasons we believed it was the right thing to do. But I think this whole scenario has really put stress test on the businesses that don't have this stuff sorted out. So businesses that don't have clear KPIs, for example, in the remote working context, I imagine are really struggling as a result of that. Businesses that don't communicate really transparently and have that kind of culture of sharing true insight about how their business is doing with each other. Again, I think that puts a lot of pressure on them. So Nat or Hasan, any thoughts on KPIs or how they've impacted what you guys do?
Do you want to go first?
Go for it.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. We have KPIs on a number of things, day-to-day anyway, but ever since we've started working fully remotely as teams, we will come together and agree very specific objectives. So we've kind of said, normally we look ahead for 6 months to a year, and we agree with our bosses and our team that this is what we're going to do and achieve and so on. But lately we've said, actually, we can't do that. So we've changed to having daily, weekly and monthly KPIs that we set ourselves. So we have a weekly team meeting, give you the operational side of it. And then we will have a round table and say, okay, this week I will achieve these things. Everyone goes around and we kind of agree on those things and then prioritize them for the week. And we do that every single week. And it's not an exercise to say, this is what I'm doing, or, kind of showing your value, but it's more for us as individuals to actually have a clear goal. And as you said, to know whether or not we're pushing forward for the right things and if we're doing the right things, because, it's actually a really pertinent thing, being alone all day, every day, you kind of get stuck in your head as well to say, am I doing the right things? And you kind of get into this moment of, what am I doing? Am I worth my time? Am I spending it well? Is it? You have all these questions that come up when you're not around a team to kind of bounce ideas off. And so, yeah, I think it's become more important now to not just actually set KPIs for yourself, but look with your team and say, do you all agree with these KPIs? Is everyone bought into this idea? And if someone doesn't deliver by the end of the week, that's fine as well. We can just tweak some of that workload to be different. So it's more about kind of empowering everyone and also getting everyone's buy-in to the common goals. It's been more important now than ever before, I think.
Yeah, and I think just, I 100% agree. I think a couple of things. One is being able to see the overall KPIs and the overall business performance, and having live data and using that data live is really, really important. And then being able to attach your team or your individual contribution to that is really important. I think understanding that, obviously, when you're looking at things like productivity, that it's about team performance, and making sure the context is always around joint success rather than, again, like just about the individual. I think it's really important. And yeah, I mean, I think the conversations that you have, your daily, even sort of non-engineering practices we're using more sprint language, daily stand-up language, and all of that sort of stuff. Even in our non sort of typical software engineering disciplines, because I think it helps just to, again, make sure you know what you're doing, but maybe in a slightly softer context than always just looking at the hard metric. But 100%, I think that knowing where you are, what you're achieving, what you're part of is all very, very key, always, but certainly now when you need that connection.
Yeah, totally agree. So there you go, Alex. Hopefully we covered your question thoroughly there. We've had a couple more, and we'll come to those in the course of further conversation. So I think let's move it on a little bit, and maybe let's try not to just make this about COVID, right? So something that Nat mentioned as a positive to take forward was that maybe the world needed a bit of a reset. Now, I don't think that is necessarily related to a pandemic, right? That's like late stage capitalism and the climate problem and all that kind of stuff, right? So the changing force of younger workers, gig economy, UBI, all that stuff, right? So let's get into that, right? Let's try and maybe look a little bit further ahead and talk about what we think needed to change and where we kind of see some of that stuff going. So another callback to the event last week with Nell. She talked about, for example, the ANA X Prize for avatars. So if you're not familiar with the X Prize, it's this incredible thing that puts a kind of cash bounty on solving a big tech problem. And previous winners have been things like Virgin Galactic, the low orbit space flight, and things like that. The irony of X Prize is that the cash prize is far, far lower than the cost of winning it. But it just like encourages people to do it because of the PR they get. And it's like the money's almost just like, oh, here's like 2% of your costs for winning it, right? But this idea with the Avatar X Prize is to create a way of in real time transporting your senses and presence to another location. So like controlling a robot from somewhere on the other side of the world that also maps back your touch and smell and taste and all that stuff. And she said, and she's a smart woman now, if you don't know who she is. So this is, some people would say this new thing, okay, Elon, whatever. But Nell is the sort of person who you should probably listen to. She said that she thinks in the next 2 to 3 years, people will be using these avatar robot things to do certain jobs. So I think that qualifies as the future of work, doesn't it? So why don't we frame it a bit bigger for a moment? So Nat, I'll start with you because you so rightly put, the world needed a reset. What are some of the things that, in a positive context, you see changing as a result of this, that you want to change or you think will change, or take it in whichever direction you like?
So I think that there are signals as opposed to things have changed. There are signals of how a reduction in how we live our lives can impact the environment, which is a very real issue. And ahead of what's happened, seeing any light to actually how we deal with climate change was quite difficult. So we have a very strong signal about things that we can reduce and change. What happens next can be a positive or a negative. And obviously there are things happening in governments around the world that would suggest we might not take the lessons that we can clearly take out of the pandemic, but that's a big one. I won't list them all, but that was obviously very much on my mind. I do think the way that we work has sort of taken away the balance of how we look after our physical health, mental health, relationships, etc., etc. So I think that the time back, even though we've all been working long hours, I think some of the time back's interesting. And then I also, personally for me, I think the civic pride that we've seen and the sort of a blend of global local as opposed to the constant drive for globalization has actually been an important thing that we're seeing in terms of where we're getting our produce from, in terms of the care that we're giving to each other and the communities that we live within. It is quite different. So I think they were just some of the things that, I started my positives with the world, and then I went to digital, and then I went to Teams. So, that was my big positive, I suppose, is the signals.
And Hasan, what about you? What's your perspective on this slightly larger theme?
Yeah, I think now you've covered most of what I was going to say, actually, starting with Teams. But the biggest impact, I think, from all of this is people have had to stop and think. I think we, in the world that we live in now, in all of us work in technology, and the pace of everything is so rapid that this whole situation has made everyone stop and pause and reflect and actually reset the goals of what it is that we're trying to achieve with our technology that we build. So an example of that is, we've companies that we worked with for a long, long time, they've been trying to implement new tools and technologies and talk about digital transformation and projects as in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 year long engagements. And now within the last month, we've taken those 2-year timeframes and condensed them down to weeks. And that's something that, if you stop and think about it, that would never ever happen. So companies like banks, large banks, for example, would never ever turn around to someone like Microsoft and say, here's our data, please manage it for us and make us more agile. It's unheard of. And that's quite interesting because leaders of these large organizations are now realizing that actually we have to change, not because we want to change, we always wanted to do it, but now we have to because it's been forced upon us in a way. And the positive side of that actually is, you mentioned Rob, about the changing nature of the workforce. The people now coming into the workplace, people who are graduating this year, for example, students, interns, even the younger people who are starting work just now, their expectations are so different to the expectations that we've always had of our workplace. And even things like work around policies, they're not really policies to those people, they are expectations that companies should have. So that's really brought things like that into perspective. And then lastly was, we mentioned that about the civic pride. Just, it's amazing how much time, we've had time, we've not had time at the same time, but just being able to spend that extra bit of time with your family. So I was thinking yesterday about all the parents and all the people who are with children or doing multiple, being a teacher, being a parent, doing their day job at the same time. Like, I found a newfound respect for them because it's not easy just fitting 24 hours worth of work into 24 hours and then doing that every single day relentlessly. It's absolutely incredible. So yeah, so that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think the pace of change that this has created is amazing. I think that hopefully will last, and then the connections that we're creating between our families and each other, even though we're remote, I think it's made a lot of people more closer to their families and the kind of softer relationships in our lives that we've had to stop and rethink about.
Yeah, great points, both of you. I think I totally agree with all of that. And just to sort of color in some of that. So I was chatting to a client yesterday who tried to digitize health records for the NHS 12 years ago. So he was a doctor and he was heavily involved in medicine in this country, and he felt that there was this desperate need 12 years ago to digitize our records. Back then, and still largely in many cases today, your health records sit on paper or on a very, very locked down database at your GPs. And if you want to change GPs, they have to send your data to the other GP. Ridiculous. Like, they might as well fax the stuff around. It is so antiquated. And back then he just could not make it happen because there was the view was always about risk, right? Everything was always about, it's too risky, it's too disruptive, let's just keep it how it is. And chatting to him about some of the changes in the last 3 months in the NHS in the UK, and maybe your big rollout of Teams and some of the Microsoft work is a good example of that. The gloves are off. Like, people are just responding to what's going on and using it as a kind of massive lever to change gear into a new way of working entirely. So forget COVID. Like, I think the lasting positive change to work over the next 3 to 5 years is you can't put some of that stuff back in the bottle. Like, it, once people get a taste for this, for these new ways of working, it's a one-way street. And I think some of the regulatory limitations that perhaps prevented people like banks or healthcare or some of the slightly more difficult industries from taking these big leaps forward have been overcome as a result of the necessity, and now will kind of enable a whole new wave of innovation. I mean, some other great examples. So telehealth, right? So to deliver a video consultation for a doctor costs about a quarter, somewhere between a fifth and a quarter as much as doing an in-person consultation. So clearly most consultations should be done on video, right? Like, it's just a no-brainer that is how it should be, particularly in places like America, where typically a patient has to travel 100 miles to a local surgery, right? If you take an aggregate of the whole country, and that comes out of the patient's pocket, by the way, that's not paid for by insurance in many cases. Things like that, it's just going to stick, right, as a result, because people have tried it, they've become familiar with it. Providers of those services have had to very quickly get it right, to Nat's point about having a good remote working setup or video conferencing set up properly and all that stuff. I mean, last night, I had corona. I don't mind sharing that in late Feb, early March, and I never got a test. I knew I had it because I was on a group of people who all got it on a trip somewhere, and some of them got tested, and I haven't been able to get a test until this week. And Pete Traynor, another BIMA exec member, is now the CEO of a company called Valor Health, and I'm plugging this because you should all know about it. Valor Health are offering corona antibody tests at cost, which is slightly less than half the price of the competitors, because as Pete says, it's the right thing to do. So for 30 quid now, you can go on valorhealth.com and you can order a coronavirus antibody test. And I booked it online. I had a video consultation with a GP within an hour, which took 10 minutes, and my test is in the post, and it will arrive today. I'll prick my finger off, it goes to the lab. I mean, that's the future of medicine, right? And those things I don't think would have changed as much as they have if it wasn't for this kind of disruption. The other thing on the climate. So I'm the chairman of a social enterprise called Offset Earth, which is a subscription service for carbon footprint and reforestation. And we saw our subscriptions like growth pause when everything collapsed, and actually we've now seen them really take off again and almost accelerate beyond where they were before. So it does seem like these themes about our world and the future of it are really close to people's hearts at the moment. I think it speaks to that civic pride thing a little bit. I think that climate is going to become an even more important, believe it or not, theme as we come out of this, which is great. And I think that the choices that people are making in their lives about where they live and work seem to be changing as well. Like if you look at the early data out of real estate in the UK and in America as it's reopening, there's this huge surge in viewing inquiries in places like Winchester in the UK, for example, as people are realizing maybe there's more to life than being in Shoreditch every weekend, or, you know, and in America, it's apparently Seattle, San Diego, and San Francisco are seeing huge exodus towards some of the more rural areas, because people are starting to realize, like, actually, I can work remotely most of the time. Therefore, maybe I'm going to reevaluate the choices I've made about living in a city where I want to bring my kids up and stuff like that. So, by the way, we've been answering Rohit's question in a really long-winded way, but there's some kind of there's some answers to your question, Rohit, about like what might come next after this, and some interesting data which hopefully some people haven't bumped into before. So anyway, lots of positive stuff happening. I think it's really encouraging to see all these different disruptive things, and you know, I'm sure we're all excited to see where they go. Let's move on, shall we? So I think let's talk a bit about how to break up days, because I think this is a really practical thing. And we've got, you know, a lot of people on this call are leading teams or leading businesses. And you know, you guys mentioned in your notes that, I think it was Hasan mentioned this idea of like days kind of blending into one. What advice do you guys have? Have you found any hacks for that to help people with that, like, delineation between home and work when they are working remotely? Like, my favorite story here is I knew a guy that worked remotely for many years, and he used to iron and put on a shirt every morning, walk to the nearest tube station, and then walk back home to work for the day, because for him that was like the mode change for getting in and out of work. Anything like that, or some more practical stuff that you guys have found useful in your teams? Why don't we start with Nat?
Oh, I'm so useless at this. I'm a horrible workaholic, but anyway, no, I think apart from what I think a lot of people have heard, I mean, I've touched on the structure of meetings, really important. We have different support groups around not just mental health, but physical exercise, book clubs, Spanish clubs, different things to actually help people build in more social elements, and not just into after work, but during work. You know, I find it really hard, to be honest with you. I think it's a really hard thing that we're not used to being sat looking, as we are now, at screens for 10, 12 hours a day. And I also work in 2 time zones. So that makes life a lot harder. So I think the tips I've just said, yes, but anybody else who's got some amazing stories, love to know.
Yeah. Hasan, what's your perspective?
was going to say we've got someone in our team who does that, puts a shirt on every day, goes outside his house, walks back inside his house. So that's quite funny story. But I think we've covered a lot of this stuff. I think what we do within, and we're lucky to be in the place we're in with Microsoft, that we use a lot of the tools that we talk about, and we've got a lot of knowledge available to us. One of the things that works for me personally is I try and again, I work in 2 time zones as well, so the US and the UK. So what I try and do is I actually break up every morning, kind of have 10-15 minutes, book in time to have a coffee, or speak to my manager every day, just to kind of stay in touch, and actually booking in time in your diary to do the stuff you want to do. It's quite important. So I never used to do that. I used to have calls and meetings, as we all do, I'm sure. But actually, I've started now shortening meetings as well. So there's a whole bunch of AI features that we're building into all of our tools that allow you to do that quickly. So for example, if you set a 30-minute meeting, a lot of research has shown that actually it's very difficult to talk for 30 minutes and absorb information and actually be productive. So is it possible to paint that 30-minute meeting to a 20-minute meeting or a 15-minute meeting, have a very, very focused conversation, and then if there's a follow-up, we can have a follow-up meeting after that. But if I look at my meetings, and we've got a bunch of well-being tools that we're building into Outlook in Teams, called My Analytics, and every week they sort of sent out, not to do a plug on the technology, but they send out information to you based on how much time you spent in meetings, how many emails you've sent, how many you've read. It's all anonymized data, so you can look at it from your point of view, and then the org can look at it as an all-up view of what departments are working with whom, what they're doing, and so on. And that's quite key, because that tells me actually how much time have I spent in meetings, how many emails have I sent, how much time have I spent after hours on calls or in meetings, and so on. And it kind of gives you little tips on how to shorten stuff. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but just I really have to stop and think about a concept that we discuss in our team meetings is, will this make my boat go faster, or will this make the boat, that whole concept around what I'm doing today, this second right now, is it going to impact my project or my goal or my achievement or whatever that is, yes or no? And I've had to really, it's very difficult, and I've had to really be ruthless with that. And if it's not, going to impact me in the next month, week, or 2 weeks, I don't do it, or I shorten the meeting. So it's just little things like that we've got to think about. Video is a big one. Having a video on in a call really changes the dynamic. That mentioned around the prep for meetings, I normally try and have 5 minutes before a meeting just to think about who's on the call, what their objectives are, what I need to prep for it. Even if it's like 1 slide, nothing too strenuous, but it just makes me kind of be a bit more focused and more present in that meeting. There's little things like that, like just like time management trips that are more relevant now than they were before.
Can I just add one more thing, actually?
Yeah, of course.
Something constructive to say, not just moan about my lack of structure. Now, I think one thing, and certainly some of the tools that we're using support, the linearity of how we work has definitely changed. And I think being able to, making sure that your work and your projects can support a less linear way of working, that will enable team members to be offline in the morning, be online late, and all of those things. I think constructing your work packages to support that, I think, is probably the most useful thing that we've been doing and that I see, because that enables people to take some more control of their time and not feel bad about it, and structure their time in a way that works for them and their very different environments.
Totally, Nat. And that's another great example of something I hope sticks, right? Because I don't think there's any reason actually why we couldn't always work like that. But it's like businesses are starting to solve those problems for this circumstance, and hopefully those things will form a bit of a legacy and maybe then become an expectation, to Hasan's point. Maybe younger workers joining businesses will just expect that to be how it's done, and it may cause ripples of disruption for years ahead. This has been fantastic. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try and rattle through some questions because we've had some great contributions. Rohit just followed up to say he previously worked for the NHS, and fax machines are indeed still an integral part of the system. So good to know. We're on the pulse there. Richard Barnes asks, he says, thanks to all, some great insight and advice. I get to do that radio host thing where I say, oh, thanks. He asks a bit about the bigger challenge for them hasn't been the transition to remote. It sounds like for his business, like yours, Nat, they were ready to do that, so it wasn't really very difficult. He's asking about the challenges coming back, and I think let's try and keep our answers sort of within minutes here so we can get through these questions. I think my perspective is coming back won't be as straightforward as people think it's going to be. There are going to be new expectations about how people work. I think a lot of the stuff that's worked remotely suddenly won't work as well anymore. People like, this is a great example, this event, right? Like virtual events, people are like, oh, it's so easy. People just turn up. Our dropout rates are great. Yeah, that's because they can't leave their houses and they've got nothing else to do. Like, so that might change when suddenly people are in offices again. So I think, why don't we touch on that? Like, what are the things we think will stick and will work, and what are the things we think suddenly might not work so well? Hasan, after you.
Yeah, just very quickly, exactly what you said. So digital events are a big thing right now. They work because, yeah, you're right, no one has anything else to do when they're at home. That will definitely change. But on the other side, when people come back to work, I think people actually want to come back, and the vast majority of people want to go to an office now, because not so much to actually do any work, but to actually see other people. So I think the comeback is going to be quite quick in the speed of it. But yeah, the way people work is going to be completely different. I think relationships are going to be very different within teams and with other teams, and it might be stronger with external teams that you normally work with. So that our work is so matrix now. So yeah, I think it's going to be very different. I don't know exactly what it's going to be like, but I think people are excited to come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we will not return to work at the same time, and for many companies, they'll never return to work in the same way. And I think this has worked because it's been uniform. Everybody has been working from home. Everyone has been staring at screens. When you have a mixture of a workforce that then becomes some in the office, some work from home, some actually, some parts of the workforce replaced with automation, there's a whole different configuration of work. And I think we need to really be careful not to just go, right, okay, that worked then, that works now. It didn't work for a reason before. We now know some of those barriers were false, but taking the time to understand why, and being very careful in that transition, I think will be really important, because it's an amazing opportunity if we observe and reflect and understand why psychologically, physically, emotionally things have worked, and from a productivity perspective things have worked and things haven't. So I think that's probably one of the things that I'm most interested in at the moment, is actually looking at almost a psychology behind workforce configuration, because that's really, really important to be able to, for companies to be able to maintain what has been achieved as we move forward.
Yes, great insight. And so I guess it sounds like you're saying, you know, your learning there is pay attention to it as we go back. You know, don't assume that things are going to work. Pay really close attention to the areas where suddenly friction turns up, where perhaps it had been absent, like the blend of remote and physical meetings, for example. And just be really sort of astute about that, and the sort of human side of it, right? It sounds it's really good insight.
Try things, experiment, change, just as we've had to do in the last 2 months. We need to keep doing that.
Yeah, sort of on reflection, it's like, oh, obviously that's the right answer, but it's not obvious actually, and it's really important to sort of almost like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, sort of over provision that stuff, right? Really make sure that we're even more focused on it than we would normally be. So let's see, what other questions have we got here? I think we've sort of covered this. So Mike Sims is asking about, you know, what implications do you think there'll be for less experienced team members who've historically learnt about culture, behaviors, and work practices in a physical workplace? So I suppose, yeah, this is interesting. So this is about, like, how would you onboard someone in a remote context, for example? Let's talk about hiring, right? My business actually has hired somebody we never met during this time, because we had a hiring pipeline, we wanted to fill roles. So for the first time in our business's history, we went through the whole interview process with a candidate remotely, which felt really weird. And how that person has been able to get onboarded into the business, I have no idea. Like, and we're pretty good at remote, right? So I can only imagine what it's like for some people. It's a great question, Mike. I think that's a really good one, and something that is a big challenge. What do you guys think? Nat, you guys, you know, your organization with 40,000 people, you must have this nailed, right? What are the tricks to bringing people in remotely and making them feel like they're part of the team?
I mean, I think because we do that all the way through from interview, assessment, always, I think that people are used to developing relationships when you don't have that face-to-face, but certainly our buddying systems, our mentoring systems, the way that you configure teams for the work that you're going to be doing all help to bring people in quickly. And personally, I think there isn't a substitute for having at least met 1 or 2 times, because that changes the relationship. But saying that, you know, I've built great relationships during the last 8 weeks as well. But yeah, I mean, I think having some systematic way, as well as the human touch, I think is really important to be able to do that, obviously at scale as well.
And Hasan, Microsoft do loads of their recruiting remotely, one would assume. Any sort of particular takeaways from your experiences there that you would think would help with that sort of onboarding new people and bringing them in a remote world?
Yeah, no, I mean, much like Nat said, there's no replacing, you know, seeing someone face to face, you know, having that physical contact and having a conversation over a coffee. But then we recently actually, there was someone on our team who started a couple of weeks ago, and she joined completely remotely, had the whole process remote. We haven't met her yet, but the way we've done it, so we have video calls with her on a daily basis and a weekly basis, just to keep it part of the team. We have in our team's channels, we've got a specific channel for onboarding, where whenever someone new joins the team, we all kind of introduce ourselves, have a little chat, send gifts, just make it a bit more human, so that even though we're not met face to face, we feel like we know each other. We all make an effort to put time in each other's diaries, have a conversation, not about work, just to kind of connect and have the chat you would have over coffee, but actually do it in a way that, you know, you can actually talk about more stuff because you haven't got the distraction of going elsewhere. So it's little things like that that you can do to bring into, you know, just replace some of that human connection while we're in the situation. But I totally agree with that. As much as we are in the situation we are, I don't think anything will ever really replace that. You know, looking at someone face to face and being in a room with them, their body language, the what they say, how they say, and all that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of stuff we can do through the technology that we can just to make it a bit easier.
Yeah, totally. So we've got 3 minutes left. I think it's a good sort of final thoughts and roundup moment. I was going to make a Jerry Springer gag, but I feel like that's probably a bit past that phase of life now, and some people might not even get it. I think from God, I really am getting old, aren't I? From my perspective, I think you know, there's been a lot of talk today about the positives, which is great. I really wanted to make sure we did that. I think things have changed forever. Lots of those things are positive. We are all going to benefit from that in the years ahead. I think trying to really focus on how to get the best out of those changes is the thing that I'm doing personally. I think we should also use this opportunity to offer any plugs or you know, shout outs we want to do. Hasan's way too modest to do this. Microsoft have some really fantastic products. We're helping lots of businesses use them. You should use them too. Teams is great. Office 365 is amazing during these times. You know, the work that Microsoft have been doing, particularly with things like Power BI as well, for being transparent and sharing data with your business, is incredible. So I'll do it for him, and thanks to Microsoft for supporting BIMA and supporting today's event as well. And other shout outs from me: check out Offset Earth, plant some trees, offset your carbon footprint. Yeah, I hope you're all well. Oh yeah, buy a COVID test from Valor Health and support Pete and what they're doing. Nat, what would you like to offer as some final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo some of what you've done, we are a Microsoft house, so Teams has been very integral to a lot of what we do and how we've been working. And there's some great lessons and some amazing experts who have used pretty much every collaboration tool under the sun, and we've got lots to share. So we'd always be happy to share, because one thing we know is we don't really know how to use these tools to their capacity. We've had to just like basically learn on the job. So backfilling our education will be one really, really good thing. So I think my only other thing is the importance of reflection of what's happened and really being mindful about what we take into how we construct our businesses in the future. I think is so important. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Nat. And Hasan, you get the last word, the headline slot.
You've said all the words I had to say, Rob. Thank you. But no, it's been really humbling, you know, being part of a company where we've made such a tremendous difference to the people around us, and you know, all the companies that use Microsoft. So we have got a lot of fantastic tools, and Teams is something that is not just a collaboration tool. It's actually made to replicate your day-to-day life. For file sharing, collaboration, video. We're trying to build so much into it all the time, just to help people. We've got a great piece of development in there called User Voice. So if there's anything that you guys see within your different businesses that you think, oh, that might be a good feature, please submit something in there, because I'm sure we will work on that. And just Power BI, as we mentioned, Teams, all of the Power Apps features to build your own tools. One thing we've seen as well is where people have the time now to think about, actually, why do we have all these paper-based processes? People using Power Apps now to actually create low-code applications for their businesses. So if you have a need, we have a tool for it. So please use everything that you need to, and just let us know how we can be better.
Fantastic, thanks, Hasan. And yeah, if you are going to move to Teams and you're on Slack currently, check out slack2teams.com, a free tool we recently released to help people with that transition. To our panelists, thank you. To our audience, thank you. Great participation today. Loads of questions. Sorry if we didn't get to you. Happy to take questions on Twitter afterwards if you're desperate to get an answer on something. We're pretty much bang on time. 1 minute past. Look at that. Back to you, Holly. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Hasan, Nat, and thank you to Microsoft. That was a great session. So you can view this session on YouTube. We'll also send a roundup of the topics and points you all made, and also any of the products that were discussed. We'll make sure all the links, etc., are in there. Next week, we have 2 events that I just wanted to very briefly mention. One is will be an excellent follow-on to this, I think. So it's being run by our partners at Kemp Little, but Nat is also a panelist there, and Charlie Fisher, who is the lead HR at Analog Folk. And it's very much about, as the industry braces itself for entering back into work, what's the people perspective? So I think, yeah, a follow on from some of the points that were made today, and specifically from a people perspective. So that is at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. And we have the amazing Sam Conniff, author of Be More Pirate, doing our fourth an audience with on Thursday evening. So Rob mentioned Nell a couple of weeks ago. Well, we have Sam next week, who will be enlightening us. So we really look forward to it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Again, yeah, absolutely. Give at BIMA and anyone else on the panel a shout on Twitter, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer further questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye.